The most disturbing books, according to Library Things, which is a platform similar to Goodreads where users track their reading experiences. And Library Things asked their users to vote on the books that they found the most disturbing. So what we have is a list that is compiled from thousands and thousands of users. However, these users or these readers, they're not exactly readers of disturbing books. They're readers from all kinds of genres. So the list is all over the place, with all different kinds of genres represented. Because this list was compiled by readers who are not exactly readers of disturbing books, I think it is relatively tame as far as disturbing books are concerned. But it is still a good list with many good books represented here. However, the list is all over the place. Not to worry, I'm going to set things straight with this tier ranking. The list comprises of 100 books. I have selected 30 from the list, 30 books that I have read and that I want to talk about. So thank you for clicking on this video. You can help out the algorithm, give this video a like, help out the channel, subscribe if you haven't already. Your support is greatly appreciated. So let's kick things off by taking a look at the 4 categories. At the very bottom, we have mayonnaise. Now, I understand that there are some people who like mayonnaise. I find it repulsive, disgusting. I want nothing to do with it. I probably won't get sick if I were to eat mayonnaise, but I would lose my appetite. It's just vile. The texture, the color, the taste. I want nothing to do with it. I used to eat mayonnaise until I went to a garden party, and my role was to make the mayonnaise. I didn't know how to do it, so this lady explained to me. She said, okay, you crack this egg, add in a little salt, and then you take this big bottle of oil and you just pour, and you mix while you pour. And after I had emptied this huge bottle of oil, I had a little bowl with just a little bit of mayonnaise, which blew my mind. I thought, that is what mayonnaise is? It's just an obscene amount of oil and an egg. So from that day on, I never ate mayonnaise again. Just the thought of it just makes me nauseated. So if I put a book in this category, it means that I got nothing out of it, and I can't recommend it. However, I do understand that there are some people who like it, some people who got something out of it. Next up, we have pizza. Pizza is fine, I guess. I used to eat pizza when I was in my early 20s, but I generally ate pizza when I'd been drinking. I don't drink that much anymore, so I don't eat much pizza. If I eat pizza, I'm not going to get sick. I'm not going to hate it. But it's going to be very difficult for me to get excited about it. You're out with your friends and somebody says, hey, let's go grab a pizza. And you're thinking, are all the restaurants closed? What's going on? No, it's just that some people like pizza. For me, I don't hate it, but I'm not going to get excited about it. Next up, we have jalapenos. I love me some jalapenos. I love to cry and to sweat when I eat. I figure if the foods are gonna suffer when I eat, I might as well suffer too, right? But I love the texture, I love it's juicy and it has a kick. So if I put a book in the jalapeno category, it means I'm excited about it. And at the very, very top, we have mustard. Mustard is the best. I love me some mustard. You have talking about good mustard, and good mustard, I mean French mustard, really. French mustard, Russian mustard is good too. There is an expression here in Latvia among the Russian people. It's that there are only 2 kinds of mustard. There's only 2 kinds of good mustard, and that is French and Russian. And French mustard is for the children. I happen to prefer French mustard, but here in Latvia we have good mustard too, and I just love it. You put some of that on your tongue, and it's like punches you in the face, you know, but like in a good way. and I just love it. So if I put a book in the mustard category, it means I think very highly of it. I think it kind of shocked me, it jolted me, it was a memorable experience. And in fact, I even have a jar here of some Latvian mustard, and I have a spoon. So when I put a book in the mustard category, I'm going to celebrate by dipping in and taking a spoonful of mustard. So that should be fun. I also have a jar of jalapenos, which I may or may not indulge in during this video. So there it is. Those are the 4 categories. There are 30 books, and I will try to get through them relatively quickly. So we'll start things off. We have Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy. And I'm going to hesitate between mustard and jalapeno. I'm going to end up putting it in jalapeno category. This is a very good book. It is dark and it is disturbing. However, I'll be 100% honest with you. I didn't completely understand what was happening when I was reading it, so I didn't really find it that disturbing. It wasn't until much later when I was talking about it with other people who had read it that I kind of pieced together what the story was about, and then okay, then yeah, it's quite disturbing. It's depraved, I think, more than disturbing. I found the writing beautiful. I love how the lands and the sun-scorched deserts were a character in and of themselves, and it's just beautifully written, and it was a good reading experience. I did find it disturbing, but then again, I didn't have a great idea of what was happening while I was reading it. Moving on, we have Wasp Factory by Ian Banks. And this is a book, I'm going to put this in the pizza category because it's hard for me to get excited about this book. I see this book on a lot of lists of most disturbing books ever. And unfortunately, when I read it, it had been just so hyped for me that it just didn't live up to the hype. There is a twist at the end, which was, I felt, disappointing. I would have loved to have read this book if the twist had happened at the very beginning so that we could explore the implications of that twist. That's not the way it was written. Is it disturbing? I wasn't disturbed. I was underwhelmed by it. Moving on, we have the Screw Tape Letters by C.S. Lewis. This is an odd book to put on a list of most disturbing books. I think what happened is that there are many users of library things who have strong religious convictions, and they took advantage of this list of voting for books to promote Christianity. Because there is nothing at all disturbing about this book. It's a work of satire. It's basically like a head demon who's writing letters to a subordinate demon, and he's trying to instruct him on how to best tempt humans. It's a bit tongue-in-cheek satire. It's really, there really is no story here. It's more just opportunities to preach and to talk about theology and things like that. So I'm going to put this in the mayonnaise category. This book did not do a lot for me. This was written a few years before the outbreak of World War II, and there are a few passages in this book that celebrate the martyrdom of soldiers, which I found kind of disgusting, personally. But it was not meant to be disturbing. I wasn't disturbed by it, and I was thoroughly underwhelmed. Next up, we have 120 Days of Sodom by the Marquis de Sade, which I will put in the mustard category. Now, I read this when I was in my early 20s. I was young and impressionable, and it did leave an impression. I had not read anything like that before. This was written in the 18th century, when the Marquis de Sade was in prison. And I don't know if it's disturbing. It is definitely depraved. it was meant to be erotic, but it is violent and depraved eroticism. It's disgusting. In fact, the Marquis de Sade, you probably know this is where we get the term sadism, sadistic, and this is a good example of that. Not my favorite book from Marquis de Sade, but when I was doing some research preparing for this video, my favorite book from Marquis de Sade is Crime d'amour, and I wanted to find out what the English translation title is, and it turns out I discovered that book has never been translated into English. I was shocked. I thought Marquis de Sade was so famous that all of his works would have been translated, but no, that is not the case. Crime d'amour was translated into German and was written in the original French, but not English for some reason. But 120 Days of Sodom is a good example of his work. And if I were to read it now, I'm sure I would react very differently. But as a young and impressionable 20-year-old, yeah, that left an impact on me. Which means that I will take a spoonful of mustard. Not a big spoonful, I'll take a little bit of mustard. This is really strong mustard. So. Okay. Whoa. All right, moving on. Next up we have Geek Love by Catherine Dunn. My eyes are going to be red by the end of this video. I am putting this in the mustard category as well. I thought this book was excellent. Let me go ahead and just double dip on that mustard. Okay. Geek Love's excellent book. It's about a family of freaks, as they call themselves. They're born with abnormalities. In fact, the head of the patriarch of this family, he runs a carnival show, a sideshow, and he wants his family to be abnormal. So he gives his wife all kinds of drugs and poisons and things like that, so that she will give birth to different kinds of children. And this book, I have seen this book on lists of best horror books of all time. I thought it was an excellent book, but it's definitely not a horror book. Is it disturbing? I wasn't disturbed, I was more fascinated by it, and I was impressed by the daring choices that the author made. So I didn't find it particularly disturbing, but it's an excellent book. Next up we have American Psycho by Bret Easton Ellis. I am hesitating between jalapenos and pizza. I am going to end up putting it in jalapenos. I didn't love this book as much as everybody else, but I read it probably 10 years ago. No, less than that, maybe 7, 8 years ago. And it deals with the shallowness of consumerism and capitalism and things like that. It is a book that feels very dated. It came out in 1991 and really encapsulates the zeitgeist of that time, but it just feels kind of dated. But I can imagine for the time that it was a good book, a great book. I am going to wash off a little bit of that mustard taste that's in my mouth with a jalapeno in celebration of American Psycho. It's very well crafted, that book, but it just, yeah, it feels a bit dated for me to place it in the mustard category. Oh, that's nice. That is nice. Okay, moving on. We have The Collector by John Fowles. The Collector is a book that I did not enjoy. No, I'm going to put this in the mayonnaise. It is a disturbing book, though. This is about a man who collects butterflies, like he captures them and puts them in a box and sticks needles in them. So he has butterflies in cases that he thinks are beautiful. And then he kidnaps this young art student that he's fascinated with, and he keeps her in his cellar. And the book is divided into two parts. The first part is from his perspective. Second part is from her perspective. And it's just ugly, I found. I found it was ugly. Yes, it's disturbing, but I did not enjoy reading it. I did not want to spend time with that guy and with that girl who, you know, is not, things are not going to end up well for her. It's just really sad. So yes, disturbing, not a pleasurable reading experience. Next up, we have This Present Darkness by Frank E. Peretti. This book is another example. This is a Christian fantasy book, similar to C.S. Lewis, except that this is a very American 20th century Protestantism. The mustard has my tongue tied, I guess. Yeah, this is a very American 20th century Christianity, and it's sword fantasy. Basically, you have these Christians and non-Christians, and then there are these demons who try to tempt them, and these demons are fought off with angels with swords and things like that. This book, there's nothing disturbing about this book at all. I think this is just another example of readers trying to promote Christianity through this list. And this book is written for teenagers. I read it when I was 13, 14 years old. And I found it quite silly at the time. I'm going to go ahead and put this in the mayonnaise section. It's quite silly, demons and angels fighting with swords. But I guess if you like sword fantasy and you like that kind of 20th century or, you know, modern U.S. if you like sword and sorcery and you would like books for young readers and you're into the U.S. Christianity kind of theology, the book accomplishes what it sets out to accomplish. It didn't do much for me. I found it a bit silly, but I was not the target reader, I don't think. Next up, we have Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson. I'm tempted to put this on the mustard list. This is a very important book, and it's an excellent book. It is a bit short and not at all disturbing. I'm going to go ahead and put it on the jalapeno, probably because I kind of want to have another jalapeno. I was surprised with Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde because I was well familiar with the story. And I was surprised at how much I enjoyed the book, even though I knew everything that was going to happen. Oh, that's nice. That's nice, but you know what would be nicer? Wash down the jalapeno with a spoonful of mustard. Let's hope we get another mustard book. Next up, we have Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro. Now, I really enjoyed this book. However, I cannot say anything about it because I feel like anything I say about this book will be a spoiler. If you haven't read this book and you're interested in Kazuo Ishiguro, just go into this book blind. I'm going to put it in the jalapenos. Next up, we have 11/22/63 by Stephen King. This is a book that a lot of people love. A lot of people love this book. I am not one of those people. Mayonnaise from me. I had a bad experience with this book. It's over 1,000 pages, and it tells a story that it really only merits about 300 to 400 pages. And it's about a man who goes back in time to put on high school theater productions. And there's a subplot about the assassination of John F. Kennedy. But there is just a lot of nostalgia for 1950s, 1960s Americana. I don't have that kind of nostalgia. I don't really have those references. So the book didn't work. I mean, there's a lot of preaching going on in it too. It was just overly long. It did not work. And it's kind of corny too, especially with the romance, the way the romance is handled. A lot of people love that book, and I can understand why, especially if you're fond of 1950s, 1960s Americana. but it didn't work on me. Next up, we have A Clockwork Orange by Anthony Burgess. Now, this is a book that I read when I was a teenager, and it blew my mind. I'm putting this on the mustard. This book is a masterpiece. For decades and decades, I would say that A Clockwork Orange was the best book I had ever read. And even now, I don't know if I could pick just one book, but it would be in the conversation. So, spoonful of mustard. There are two versions of A Clockwork Orange. It was originally published in the UK, and then when they published it in the US, they removed the last chapter. So I've read both versions. I have a slight preference for the US version without the final chapter. The final chapter doesn't really do much. Well, this is a gorgeous book. He takes, it's set, I guess, in the future with a gang of youths. And he takes, the writer, Anthony Burgess, he takes Cockney dialect, which is found in certain areas of London, and he mixes it with Russian to create this slang that this gang uses. It's fascinating. Fascinating work. Next up, we have The Road Through the Wall by Shirley Jackson. Shirley Jackson is one of my favorite authors of all time. This was her first book, and I think it's quite good. But it's good, but it's not good for Shirley Jackson. I think what's great about this book is that you can recognize, if you're familiar with Shirley Jackson's work, you can recognize the themes and the stylistic choices that she uses in her writing that she would go on later to really refine. And here you have them in an unrefined form. So it's quite interesting for that aspect. It's not a disturbing book. There are children in this book who do, one of the children does something disturbing, but it's not graphic enough to actually be disturbing to me. But it's a good book. If you love Shirley Jackson, it's worth checking out. If you've never read Shirley Jackson, I think there are better books of hers to check out first. Next up, we have Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck. This is another book I read when I was a teenager, and I remember really, really liking it. It wasn't disturbing. I mean, again, something disturbing happens, but the way it's handled, isn't too shocking or too disturbing. Yeah, excellent book. Next up, we have Zombie by Joyce Carol Oates. I have seen other booktubers who love this book. This book did nothing for me. It's pretty much a novella that is presented as kind of the diary of a serial killer. And the serial killer, this guy, he's a complete loser. There's really nothing interesting about him. A story that is delivered in from the perspective of the serial killer. I've read probably dozens more, others that did more for me than that one. It's well done. I mean, she's a great writer, but yeah, it didn't do much for me. Next up, we have Disgrace by a South African author whose name I cannot pronounce. I'm gonna take a stab and say Kotze. It's probably not it. This is the winner of the Man Booker Prize. Yeah, I had a bad experience with this book. It is disturbing. It is, I'm going to put it in the pizza category. I didn't have a good experience with this, but I can recognize that it's beautifully, I mean, it's expertly crafted and expertly written, but it's so unpleasant. The complete disregard for others and treating people like they're less than human, like they're animals. Which wouldn't be a bad thing if we treated animals great, like they should be treated, but we don't. We treat them like animals, as the expression goes, and in this book, people are treated like that, and it's repulsive. I was disturbed, but not in a fun way. I was disturbed in a very unpleasant way with that book. Next up, we have Haunted by Chuck Palahniuk. Chuck Palahniuk is an excellent, excellent writer. I've enjoyed many of his books. I didn't really enjoy this one so much. I'll put it in the pizza category because it's probably better than most books, but because it's Chuck Palahniuk, I had more expectations, higher expectations when I went into it. It's basically a short story collection, but all the stories are written by writers who attend this writer's retreat. So they all come together to form one coherent narrative. Disturbing, it's too unbelievable to be disturbing for me. It's kind of ridiculous, and I think the aim is to disgust more than it is to disturb. And you could find it disgusting, many people have, but it just seems so implausible and so ungrounded that I didn't really have a great experience with this book. Next up, we have The Trial by Kafka, Franz Kafka. This is a brilliant book. This is a masterpiece, I would say. Kafka-esque, meaning it just has no logic to it. I think this is where that expression comes from this book, The Trial. This was written in 1914, 1915. And he never finished the book. He died a few years later, and one of his friends went back and kind of finished it. He didn't really finish it. He just put an ending to it and put it out. So it kind of ends abruptly, but it works for the story. When I was the first time I read this book, I thought it was about communism, because this guy is kind of trapped in this illogical trial, or he's being accused of things that they don't tell him what he's being accused of, just that he has to go through all this process, administrative process. And I thought it was some kind of condemnation of Soviet communism. However, it was written in 1914, 1915. This is a few years before the October Revolution. And I have read articles or essays about this book that say that it is about anti-Semitism and how illogical that is. And you're born Jewish and people hate you and you don't understand why. You've done nothing to merit this kind of hatred. So seen from that angle, it's really interesting. It's a great book. Oh, and it's an opportunity for some more mustard. Okay. Back at it. Next up, we have Lolita. This is a difficult book to categorize, because when I read it, I did not enjoy this book at all. It's very unpleasant. However, it's gorgeously written and gorgeously crafted. This book, I have to put it in the mustard category. It's too exceptional. It's unpleasant, but too exceptional. We have it's a great example of the unreliable narrator. He's telling us about all these horrible things that he's done, but he's telling us in part because he wants to justify these acts to himself, but he admits that he's a bad person who did bad things. However, you have to kind of read between the lines, because he's not telling the truth, and that's what is disturbing about this. Yeah, it's just a very unpleasant book. Disturbing, yes, but it's just it's expertly written. Speaking of expert, oh, that one went up my nose. Okay, moving on, we have In Cold Blood by Truman Capote. This book didn't do much for me. I mean, nonfiction doesn't really interest me. And this is about two men who go to Kansas and they just break into a family's home and they kill them. And then they're caught. And then they're going to be killed, capital punishment. So Truman Capote gets an interview and interviews them and writes this book. So yeah, it's disturbing because there's just a callousness to it. There's just not valuing human life. It's just sad. Sad and disturbing, but it didn't really do much for me. So I'm going to put this in the pizza category. Next up, we have Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. This is hard sci-fi. Hard sci-fi does not work on me. Hard sci-fi does not work on me. I did not enjoy this book. But I guess if you like hard sci-fi, then, you know, this is probably one of the more celebrated examples of that genre. Next up, we have The Road, another book by Cormac McCarthy. I read this book maybe like right when it came out, and I was in a bad place, like mentally. I was in a bad headspace when I read this. And there was no way I was going to like this book just because where my head was at when I read it. However, I have to recognize, you know, years later, looking back, that it is very well done. So I'm going to put this in the jalapeno category because that is going to give me the opportunity to wash down that mustard with a juicy jalapeno. Okay. The Road is father-son post-apocalyptic tale. They're walking down a road trying to get somewhere safe, and they encounter marauders. You know, they have to stay away from them, stay safe from them. One scene in that book that particularly hit me hard and that I still remember is when they're cooking with the gas burner, and the kid he forgets to close the gas burner. That was an impactful scene. Next up, we have Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas by Hunter S. Thompson. I don't know what this book is doing on this list. It's not particularly a disturbing book. There are things that the characters do that are depraved, but it's almost treated as a joke, which is disturbing in and of itself. But it's a minor part of the book. This is kind of silly, fun, drug-induced nonsense, but I thought it was highly enjoyable. I like this book. I could have done without the depravity. That you could make a cleaner version of this book that I would enjoy more. But for what it is, I enjoyed it. Next up, we have The Unbearable Lightness of Being by Milan Kundera. Another example of a book I don't understand what it's doing on this list. There is nothing really disturbing about this. This is a book set mostly in Prague in the 1960s, under Soviet control. And this is a man who is a womanizer, but he's also in love with this woman, and it's just it's a book that's more philosophy than actual story. But Milan Kundera's writing is so good. I'm tempted to put this in the mustard category, but ultimately there isn't really much of a story there. It's more philosophy that's expressed through these characters, but it's done so well. The book right before this one, the Book of Laughter and Forgetting, I think is my favorite of his. He's a really good author. Next up, we have The Stranger by Albert Camus. And this is a book, it's disturbing in the sense that this guy, this narrator, the narrator, the central character, he just doesn't value human life at all. And he's just kind of dulled by it. It has a gorgeous opening. Aujourd'hui, maman est morte. Ou peut-être hier, je ne sais pas. I read that, as a teenager, and I still remember that line. It's a fantastic way to introduce a character. Today, I don't know what the English is. Today, mother died, or was it yesterday? I don't remember. So it just shows you how he just doesn't value human life. So it accomplishes what it sets out to do. It's not particularly interesting beyond that, in my opinion. And I have liked pretty much everything I've read from Albert Camus. I've liked more than that one. So I'll put it in the pizza category. Next up, we have Crash by J.G. Ballard. This book is excellent. Mustard. It is a book about a man who discovers eroticism in car crashes. He gets his wife involved in his fantasies, and then they meet other people who have similar sensibilities. So it explores the eroticism of car crashes. That's so strange. And it's just such a daring topic and a daring way to write this, because the author, he names his central character after him. He calls him John Ballard. And the book is written in such a cold, mechanical tone that works beautifully for the story it's telling. I was super impressed with that book. Speaking of super impressed, House of Leaves, my Mark Z. Danielewski. This is a masterpiece. Absolute masterpiece. It's a book about labyrinths that is presented as a labyrinth. It's also satire. It's also very funny. As much as I love mustard, there is a point when maybe you eat too much mustard. I'm not at that point yet, but doing this video, for the first time in my life, I see that maybe there is a point when too much mustard is not a good thing. I'm not there yet, though. Is this book disturbing, House of Leaves? I was not disturbed by it. There is one scene that is so spectacular. It's probably one of my favorite scenes in all of literature. If you've read the book, it is the scene with the matchbook. My goodness, how gorgeous of a scene is that? And yeah, that could be disturbing if you just sit there and think about that scene for a while. Yeah, that can be disturbing. Next up, we have The Turn of the Screw by Henry James. This is so tame. This is such a tame book. It's a ghost story. And ghosts are stupid. Ghosts are silly. I'm not scared of ghosts or believe in ghosts because I am not a child. So ghost stories never work on me, with the exception of Cold Heart Canyon by Clive Barker, because that's a great book. But as far as ghost stories go, this is one of the better ones. So I'll put it in the pizza category. I mean, if you like ghost stories, this one's well done. But at the end, it's still a ghost story, so it can't rank any higher than pizza. Next up, we have The Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka. This is a novella. It's very interesting. This man wakes up and he discovers that he's an insect. And there's subtext there, but it's presented as just a man who wakes up and he's an insect. So you can read into this whatever you want, and which makes for an interesting reading experience, and you can have different experiences each time you read it. It's quite good. It's not disturbing. I mean, unless you bring something to it that's disturbing, but it is really good. And we'll close with 1984 by George Orwell. And this book, again, is a book that I read as a teenager, and I was very, very impressed. So I'm going to put this in the mustard category. This book, post-dystopian book, and he invents so many words for this book, like Big Brother, obviously, and like using speak as a suffix, like newspeak, booktube speak. And this book has one of my favorite lines in all of literature, which is, "We have always been at war with East Asia." I love that line, especially in the context of this book. The line is over the top, it's simple, and it says a lot in the context how they're rewriting history, but they're so brazen about it. So there you have it. Looking back at this list, we have many good books. I think for me, we don't have disturbing books. We have depraved books, but nothing that really disturbs me. I would say, with the exception of Disgrace by Coetzee. That one was disturbing. And the rest are, Lolita, I guess, was disturbing. But the rest are more depraved rather than disturbing. Do you have any experience with the books I talked about in this video? What is your favorite brand of mustard? I look forward to connecting with you in the comment section. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe. Thank you for watching. I'll see you at the next video.